Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Families for Democracy, a program put on by the League of Women Voters. My name is Ron Pate. I'm the membership chair. Some people wonder how I could be the membership chair for the League of Women Voters, and the answer to that is since 1974, the League of Women Voters has been co-ed. So, and we have quite a few male members. Now, I just want to talk for a minute about voting history, and there's not a lot of real young people in the room, but I just want to do the history of it, that women didn't get the right to vote until 1920, and in the African American community, we really didn't have full voting rights until the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act of the 1960s due to Dr. King and President Johnson. So in America, white men of property always had the right to vote. We had the right to vote even before there was a country. There were state legislatures in every state, and men could be involved in government. It's been a long and hard struggle for women, African Americans, Native Americans. Now, the struggle continues because even in our modern times, we have voter suppression laws and gerrymandering, a lot of things that either deny people the right to vote or dilute their vote. So the League works on these issues. We just had a case in Pennsylvania where we successfully fought gerrymandering, and we fight these voter suppression laws. So that's one of the big things that the League is involved with. Another thing I want to touch on just very, very briefly is voter participation. So I was looking at the records, historical records, and in the state of New Jersey, in 1924, 82% of the voters that were registered voted. By 1998, that had gone down to 35%. Now, in this current election we just had for governor, state legislator, the state assembly, and the state senate, the average was 35%. So we have a terrible, terrible problem with that, which leads me right into what the League really does, is voter education. Because people don't vote because they don't know about the issues. They choose not to vote. They don't think it's important. So we need to work on, that's an issue that the League is working on and something that has to change, the voter participation. Now, we've got a wonderful group of speakers. We have the president of the League of Women Voters of New Jersey, Nancy Hettinger. I hope I got that right. And without further ado, I'd like to bring Nancy right up here.
And you'll be interested to know that we have 3 male members on the state board. So we definitely, League is not for women only. I was asked to speak about the history of the League and then where we are today. So as you just heard, the League was founded right before actually women gained the right to vote in 1920. We are almost 100 years old, and it took 72 years for that to happen. The right to vote. We have the League of Women Voters is 3 levels. We have if you join the League, you have membership at the state, the national, and local. And the League itself began as a mighty political experiment to help the 20 million women who were newly enfranchised, teach them how to vote, their responsibilities as voters, and encourage them to use their power to participate in shaping public policy. So from the beginning, the League has been an activist, grassroots organization whose leaders believe that citizens should play a critical role in advocacy. They've always been nonpartisan, and to this day we still don't support candidates or parties. But we protect, and that was done because they wanted to protect the organization from becoming mired in party politics back in the day when they were formed. As I said, they were, but members were encouraged to be political themselves. So people always have the misnomer that League members aren't political, and we certainly are. We're very political. We're just not partisan. And our individual members, as long as they're not president or membership, they can be involved in partisan activities. I think I just turned that off. We have an advocacy arm, which is we work on public policy issues and advocating for change, and we have a voter service arm, which does voter registration, get out the vote, and those kinds of activities. And Our mission is empowering voters and defending democracy. And the League envisions a democracy where everyone has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. So how have we evolved? We've remained true to our mission. On the national issue, the League started out working on civic issues like child labor, minimum wage, equal opportunity for women in government and industry. They were involved in the Shepard-Towner Act, which is like the first, it was the first federally funded social welfare program. They were involved in world peace, civil and human rights, and you're going to hear a little bit about the fact that the League was one of the first NGOs invited to participate in the UN. They were asked by President Truman, to serve as consultants to the U.S. delegation to the UN. And again, Doris is going to talk about that, so I don't want to take anything of her thunder away. So fast forward to today. What are we doing in New Jersey? Well, what are we doing nationally, first of all? Voting rights are under attack. We may not feel it as much in New Jersey, but they are all around the country. And we're at the forefront of the most important federal and state voting rights cases. You heard about Pennsylvania. Most recently, Minnesota, I think it was last week, filed a suit against the Minnesota Motor Vehicle Commission for failure to provide federally mandated voter registration services. Michigan had a lawsuit for unconstitutional partisan gerrymandering. They were accused of cracking and packing Democratic constituencies and then spreading Republican voters across into safe districts. So by packing people into a district, you end up having fewer representatives. Pennsylvania, you've all heard, challenged the state's congressional maps. They were found unconstitutional, and they were ordered the Republican Party was ordered to submit a plan with compact and contiguous districts different than what they had, more fair maps. And then the big Supreme Court case right now is Gill v. Whitford, and we're all waiting for a decision on that. That is also a gerrymandering case. So League has a national program on gerrymandering, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but it's all about drawing fair districts. And gerrymandering is when you use advantage to fudge the district so that the party in power has more representatives. So we've also actively opposed discriminatory voter ID laws. If you remember the Kobach Commission that President Trump formed, we were actively opposed to that. We fight attacks on voter registration all the time. And we hold lawmakers accountable when they try to institute last-minute election day barriers. We're also right now fighting the citizenship question to the census, which you may have heard about. But in New Jersey, a lot of exciting things are happening. So I'm going to brag a little bit about the New Jersey League. Last week, we participated in the signing of the automatic voter registration bill, which is the country's most expansive automatic voter registration bill. And what that means is when you go to the Motor Vehicle Agency, MVC, to get a license or to get an ID, you will automatically be registered to vote. So if you're moving out of your county to another county and you go to change your license, you don't have to re-register. You will automatically be registered. So it's an opt-out rather than an opt-in program, which is what it used to be. And then to take it a little bit further, it also will apply to other state agencies. So it will apply to the kind of agencies that provide assistance to marginalized communities, but that's not going to happen until we get the MVC figured out first. So the goal is get the MVC, and the reason we started with MVC is because they already do the opt-in, so they had the technology to do it. So it's really just a matter of what made the most sense financially. So once they get the MVC, then they're supposed to go to other state agencies that deal with federal programs as part of the federal motor voter law, which the National League was responsible for getting passed. Then we also, this week, I'm going to be attending the signing of the equal pay legislation, We're with a coalition called the Time to Care Coalition. It includes a lot of other organizations. And for quite a while, we've been lobbying for equal pay legislation, and we finally got that passed, and it's going to be signed on Tuesday. We're also, with the Time to Care Coalition, we worked on earned sick leave. So a lot of people, believe it or not, over 1 million New Jersey workers do not have sick leave. And so what this bill does is it says you can earn sick leave. You can earn a day for every 40-hour week you work. That's not quite right. But you need to work 40 hours before you get a day. So it mandates leave time for people who are sick. If you've ever worked in the service industry, you know how difficult that is. I worked as a waitress all through college, and I worked with women who were raising their children on their own, and they came to work sick because they couldn't take any time off. They needed whatever time they could take off without pay to be with their kids when they were sick. So it's really kind of way beyond time for us to have a way for these workers to earn sick leave. So that's happening. We've also been involved for many years on refunding family planning services. If any of you remember, we used to get a federal match for family planning, $7.1 million, and the last administration eliminated that from the budget. And every year we went back, and every year we'd get the legislature to agree to it, and then it would get vetoed. And then we couldn't get an override. So you need a lot more votes to get an override on a bill. So we could get people to vote for it, but we couldn't get them to vote against the governor's veto. So, but lo and behold, we have a new governor, and so the family planning funding for family planning services bill has passed and been signed. The other thing we're looking forward to is the new Voter Empowerment Act. And this is kind of interesting. This is an act that says that if you're 17 during the primary, but you're going to be 18 in time for the election, you can vote in the primary. So we've already got, right now we've already got, and this happened last year, I believe, 17-year-olds can register even if they're not going to be 18 by the election, and their registration will still be good once they turn 18. So they don't have to go back again. So this makes it, it's helpful this way because we can get kids while they're in high school to register to vote when they're 17. So this new Voter Empowerment Act is exciting because in New Jersey, so much of the action happens in the primaries. And it's a great way to get students started or young people started. So they'll be able to, if this bill passes, and we think it's going to pass, they'll be able to vote in a primary if they're going to be 18 in time for the general election. The other thing that, some of the other things we've done is, this one might not sound so big, but it is for League, and that is to require email addresses when candidates file their nominating petitions. For us, the reason, I don't know if you're familiar with vote411.org, but the League of Women Voters maintains an online voters guide. It's called vote411.org. And you can go on there after the primaries, and you can find out, you can always find out where your voting location is, whether you're registered, different information about voting. But after the primaries, you'll be able to find out who the candidates are, where they stand on positions, because local leagues input this information. They send questionnaires out to the candidates, and the candidates provide answers. They get put into Vote 411 so that you can compare them and decide whose positions on the issues are closest to your positions. So, but it's always been difficult, even to schedule a candidates debate. We couldn't reach candidates because they didn't provide emails. We had to do it by snail mail, and so it just held everything up. So a lot of the local leagues came to us and said, we've got to do something about this. So we met with the Election Commission, and they said, we can't do anything unless it's legislatively required of us. So we had a bill drafted, and it's moving through. I think it's going to be, I don't know if we're going to have it in time for the general election this year, but we'll definitely, I think it's going to pass. There's no opposition, I don't think. It's all, the only opposition is financial on all of these things so far. We're also working on modernizing our voting system. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'll go really quick. So in-person early voting, online voter registration. They've passed one Senate committee. We're working towards them after the April break. Restoration of voting rights for people convicted of a crime, big one for us. Look for that. We're working with ACLU and Institute for Social Justice on that issue. Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, we worked on getting that. I can talk to you about another time. Offshore oil and gas. Okay, we're very involved with the Women's March and Power to the Polls and March for Our Lives. And as an outcome of the March for Our Lives, the Principals and Supervisors Association of New Jersey and the Social Studies Association of New Jersey met with the League, and we organized a program called My Voice, My Vote. They were looking for an alternative to walkouts. And so this is what they came up with, and local leagues are going into the high schools to teach students about registering to vote and why it's important to vote. I went yesterday to Randolph for that. So you might be getting calls from the office about that. And then one last thing, really not last, I had other things, but we're also really involved in trying to prohibit the Delaware River Basin Commission from allowing fracking in the Delaware River Basin and allowing that waste to be disposed of in the basin, in the Delaware Basin, or actually in New Jersey either. So keep your eyes out for that. We now have action software, so if you're a member, you'll get requests to call on occasion with backup on information on the bills. Thank you.
The next speaker is Johanna Edge, and she's going to talk about our local issues.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joanna Edge, and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to tell you a little bit about what the local League of Women Voters is and what it can do for you. Our local league was also founded in 1920, the same year, as people have mentioned, that women got the right to vote in the United States, and that both the United States League and the New Jersey Leagues were also founded. Our chapter was originally called the Montclair League of Women Voters. In time, it became the LWV of Montclair Glen Ridge, and the year after I joined, it became the League of Women Voters of the Montclair area, so that its name better included the interests of people like me, who at the time lived in Verona, and didn't live in those two specific towns. Currently, we have members from Bloomfield, the Caldwells, Essex Fells, Glen Ridge, Montclair, Verona, and West Orange, with a smattering of members, hope that doesn't mean anything, who live in other nearby towns. Full voting membership is open to any citizen of voting age, both men and women. And as we like to say, we have women in our name, but men in our ranks. This includes our current membership chair, my husband Bill, and the husbands of and friends of another of our rest of our members. And as somebody said too, that membership in a local league automatically makes you a member of both the League of Women Voters of the United States and the League of Women Voters of New Jersey. So why did I join the League in 1989? My husband was active locally in partisan politics. I wanted to be active and serve my community, but I wanted to do so in a nonpartisan way. And I definitely found the right fit for me here in the League. Individual members are free to be active in partisan politics of the party of their choice, but board members may not do so because we cherish our nonpartisanship status and want to keep that role within the political arena. I'm currently the treasurer, but there's opportunity to serve in lots of different roles. I've been chair of the Environmental Quality Committee, secretary, public relations chair, vice president, and even president of our local league. The question of why I joined the league was posed to members at our 75th anniversary celebration in 1995. And here's what some of our members said then about why they joined our group. To participate in the political life of Montclair, to learn about community issues and meet active, involved people. I was very impressed with the women in the LWV. I welcomed the information that came into my home about current affairs, and it was not long before I became active. And I think many of us can speak to that issue. It doesn't take long before you're looked to be in an active role. To become more informed on both sides of issues rather than only one point of view, and the person actually wrote mine after that. To join others in worthwhile causes, and to learn more about government. I attended a unit meeting on immigration and was so impressed with the members and their reports that I wanted to be part of the League. And I believe it is important to take part in the community in which one leagues. So what makes up the foundation of our organization? In addition to policy positions that we adopt through either consensus or concurrence of members, the LWVUS also has stated principles. These are concepts of government that include that the LWV believes in representative government and in the individual liberties established in the Constitution. The LWV believes that democratic government depends upon informed and active participation in government. The LWV believes that every citizen should be protected in the right to vote, and the LWV believes that responsible government should be responsible to the will of the people. So what do we here in the Montclair Area League do? We hold public forums to educate our communities about current affairs. We advocate on issues like education, housing, and local government. We visit places like the New York Historical Society, where we recently saw an exhibit on Bohemian women of the 1920s, and the Eleanor Roosevelt House that's in New York City as well. We have movie nights, and we have holiday parties. We conduct candidates nights, at which office seekers debate each other and answer questions that are posed by the voters in the audience. We write letters to our representatives, and now that you don't write letters anymore so much, we either email them or we contact them through phone. We participate in national and state league consensus studies of issues. We're interested in helping more women gain elective office through our Running and Winning program. We focus on making democracy work, we register voters, and we make it our mission to promote the active and informed participation in government. So just give you a couple of specific examples of initiatives we've undertaken in the years. Years ago, we were active in Essex County's charter change, and then in changing Montclair's form of government to its current council-manager form. We remain proud of Betty Evans, a longtime member of our league, who was the first female councilor in Montclair. About 15 years ago, our league began inviting mayors from towns in which we had members to join each other in conversation and to discuss government-related topics of interest to them and our members. Several years ago, we began partnering with the local Chamber of Commerce at these mayors' breakfasts, and since then, this annual event has largely been run by a consortium of chambers and has hundreds and hundreds of attendees. They also give you a free breakfast now, which is great. But the emphasis remains on having government officials discuss issues about Essex County. More recently, two of our local league members, one of whom is Doris Shapira, who will speak after me, took action on the issue of human trafficking. Because the league did not have an official position on the issue, Doris and Liz studied the issue and presented their findings to our local chapter. After we heard information on both sides of the issues with questions on the topic of human trafficking, our league reached consensus. We then promoted the issue on a statewide league level, urging other leagues to make this an official state position, and this was done at the state convention in 2013. Then the New Jersey League, following the path that had been blazed by Doris and Liz, achieved concurrence at the LWVUS National Convention in 2014. Delegates there adopted what Doris and Liz had worked so hard on, and today, league members around the country are free to be active on the issue with the positions that began in the Montclair area. So let me close by saying that ours is a grassroots organization. This means that change and ideas rise up out of local leagues rather than being imposed from the top. Members can be as active as they want to be. But even if not participating right now in an active or leadership role, our members support our goals by their continued membership in the league. So thank you for your time and attention. We hope you'll consider joining this trusted organization because we'd love to have you in our ranks too.
Our next speaker is going to be Doris Shapira, who's going to talk about the UN.
Hi, everybody. What would you think if I said to you that without the League of Women Voters, it's possible that the United Nations might not exist today? You would all say, she's crazy. Well, let me talk to you a little bit about the League's history with the UN, and then maybe later, when we have discussion, you can tell me what you think about that theory. In 1940, the U.S. League began to think about a post-war organization for peace. They were aware that earlier the League of Nations had failed, and they wanted to have an organization to deal with peace and security. So the League drafted a public campaign. In 1944, the League trained 5,000 women on a campaign called Take It to the People. They distributed over 1 million pieces of literature. The State Department received 1,000 letters a day, 90% from League members urging the formation of the UN. Because of the support that the League gave to the UN, the League was invited to a charter conference for the establishment of the UN in San Francisco in 1945. We were one of 42 NGOs, non-government organizations, invited. And at the conference, the U.S. government asked the League to take the lead in the formation of the UN Commission on the Status of Women. It wasn't exactly called that then, but that's what it was. And at that conference, U.S. delegates took many suggestions from the League representatives. Thus, the UN Commission on the Status of Women was born. Its work on women's issues meets every March at the UN in New York. And since I was the National League's UN observer for 20 years, I have been attending the CSW meeting, Commission on the Status of Women meeting, since 1990 every year. It's an amazing event, which Susan will talk to you about because she went for the first time this year. But thousands and thousands of NGO representatives from all over the world come, and we hear their voices. And we also can affect what the governments are working on. The governments draft a document and pledge to implement it in their countries after they've agreed on the document. When the UN was started in 1945, Eleanor Roosevelt, who was on the New York State Board of the League of Women Voters, was the first U.S. delegate to the UN. And she led the committee that drafted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And if you go into different offices in the UN, you see her picture hanging up holding the Universal Declaration. So she was one of our famous members. But what I really want to talk to you about is a NGO Committee on UNICEF's Working Group on Girls. In the early 1990s, the League of Women Voters of the United States had children at risk as a priority issue. And who was more at risk than girls? UNICEF had a committee called the NGO Committee on UNICEF. And a friend of ours at the UN was very active with that committee. And UNICEF went to her and said, we'd like you to form a working group on girls. And since children at risk was a priority for the League, we jumped at the chance to work with her on that. And so we were founding members of the Working Group on Girls. And why did we want to help girls particularly? These are some of the issues that affect girls only, and most of the people at the UN and most of the delegates were not aware that girls had unique problems. There was infanticide in countries where boys were preferred. The girls were fed last when not much food was available because boys had priority. There was FGM, which is female genital mutilation, occurring. There was early marriage. Young girls were married off 5, 10 years old to older men as second or third wife. And young mothers giving birth before their bodies were ready caused fistula, which is a terrible thing that happens to them. There were also child widows because these young girls were married to older men, and in some places terrible things happened to to girls once they were widows. And in a lot of countries, girls could not inherit anything, so they were completely at a loss once they became widows. A lot of girls could not go to school because either their family couldn't afford the school uniforms and they preferred to send their boys, or they had to stay home and take care of younger children and do all the work in the house. If a girl was able to go to school and was menstruating, she had to stay home often because there was no facilities at school for her, and therefore she fell behind in her work. Also, another reason she fell behind in her schoolwork, is that when she came home, instead of being able to do her homework when there was still light, she had to do all kinds of chores. Then there's also the problem of human trafficking, which occurs more to girls than others. Human trafficking both for sex and for domestic slave work in households. So you can see that's just some of the things that the working group on girls was addressing. So what happened at the beginning when I started there in the early 1990s, a lot of the meetings had 2 years of preparations where work on documents occurred. So the first 2 meetings that I worked on were the World Summit for Social Development and preparations for the Beijing Women's Document. And the first delegate that I was assigned to address was the Chinese delegation. And I had a sheet of paper that showed all the problems with girls, including infanticide, which was occurring in China. And so I was a little bit afraid. I had never done this before. And I went up to the Chinese delegate, and I handed him my card, and he handed me his card, and I told him why I was there. And we talked for a few minutes, and he was translating to his colleagues while we talked. At the end, he thanked me and bowed to me, and I bowed to him, and I walked away, and I thought, well, this isn't so terrible after all. So after that, it was much easier to lobby government delegates and to get wording changes. And human trafficking was mentioned. I actually got my own wording, got the governments to put my own wording on human trafficking into the Beijing Women's Document. And working with a lot of women from the African continent in preparation for the Beijing conference, these women had come to the preparatory meetings with the idea that they wanted to work on the girl child. And we had meetings every day for NGOs that wanted to work on the girl child. And these delegates from different African countries had access to their delegations. So we were able to get a whole section into the Beijing document on the girl child. And once that was there, then the UN Commission on the Status of Women had to take up the girl child every 4 years. So that's about all I have to say now.
Our next speaker is going to be Susan Mack, who is one of our newer members and the first-time delegate to the United Nations.
So thank you, Doris, for your nearly 30 years of service with the UN. My experience is very different. I was a first-time delegate this year, and when I joined the League January of last year, so I'm a brand new League member, and Doris was one of the first people I spoke to, and she told this great story, which I'll never forget. She said that, she was very involved with the UN, as you all know now, and she was standing in a reception line with a lot of international dignitaries, and she was going through shaking everyone's hand, and she comes to this fellow and introduces herself, Doris, and mentions the League, and he said to her, finally, an agency I've heard of. Which just speaks volumes about how important the League was to the UN, is to the UN, and just nationally. So that was really inspired me, and I thought, it'd be so fun to go to the UN next year. But I never thought in a million years I would be able to come. But I did put my name in the basket anyway, just in case. I was put on a waiting list. But as luck would have it, there was a last-minute cancellation, and because we live so close to New York, it was just easy for me to pop over the river, right? So I was really excited about it. my first experience with it, the security is pretty strong there, I have to say. So you have to go in advance to get a badge, show your passport, get all these checks and all that stuff. And it was a March Sunday, one of those freezing cold Sundays, and I was on the sidewalk waiting for my badge, and 45 minutes on the sidewalk, and there was a 20-something-year-old that I was standing next to, and I started talking to her, and it was unbelievable. She's had 10 years of advocacy already, and she was still in her 20s. It was crazy. And she was talking about her successes, her challenges, how much she's done. And I felt this small, I could never have said that in my 20s. But it was very inspiring. So the next day I go on Monday, and I'm walking up to the UN. I see all the flags. There's actually a poster board back there of kind of how it looks, obviously from the outside, and just what a important institution we have right here in New York. I go through security, which is pretty stiff again, walk through the side door, and I just got a blast of energy. There were so many countries represented there, and it was a rainbow of humanity. It was beautiful. And the passion and the advocacy, it was really I have to say, overwhelming. I'd never felt that before. And it was also overwhelming to try and figure out what to do. I'd gotten if you ever are a delegate, you end up getting about 30 emails a day, Doris. It's crazy. But so to decide what events you want to go to, in the UN itself, there's numerous rooms that have back-to-back meetings that you get to choose from. In addition, there's 4 or 5 venues outside the UN who also have back-to-back meetings, and you get to choose from those. So since I have an educational interest, I chose workshops related to that. But no matter what type of workshop I went to, it was informative. It was inspiring. Folks around the world are doing so much work for women's issues, for anything under the sun, and it's, from Africa to Europe to Australia, from the Nordic countries, everybody was well represented. It was an amazing experience. But I have to say, my favorite part was a cocktail reception. Wine, it was nice. One of our league members lives near the UN, and she does this, I believe, annually, and she has a reception for all the delegates. So we all trundled over there on a Wednesday, and there were about 15 of us, and we were sitting in the room, a circle in the room, in her living room, and there were folks nationally. There was folks from San Francisco, Phoenix, Boston, D.C., there was even a woman from Zimbabwe who had been part of the San Francisco League, but had moved back home, but wanted to create a league-type agency in Zimbabwe. So we were all sitting around talking about everything we had learned and all the issues, things we wanted to get changed, and we were talking about education and environment, and it was just how we were going to bring this back to the community. And I was too young for the 60s, even though I have a lot of gray hair. I was too young for the 60s, and I felt, like I could have been in a West Village apartment somewhere with a bunch of beatniks talking about how to change the world. It was a highlight of the UN for me, and it could very well be a highlight of my year. I got to tell you, it was amazing. Not to steal Ron's thunder, but we were doing a Q&A after every speaker. Maybe now's a good time just to talk about if anybody has questions for any of the league members before we move on to a non-league speaker. Anybody questions? No? Yeah, you have a question. You guys, the league people want to come up?
Is it true the U.S. has not yet signed that thing of the human rights deed?
There's a difference between signing and ratifying. A government signs when they say that they will promise to bring it before their Congress or Parliament. Once it's approved by the government, then they ratify something. Now, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about, but 2 very important treaties that the U.S. has signed but never ratified is the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We're one of 2 countries in the world that have not ratified that. And then the Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. There's just like 5 countries, including the U.S., that has not ratified it. So, and we did not ratify the International Criminal Court, and there were some. Why not? Which one? Okay, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. There were lots of right-wing people in this country who felt that if we ratified that, children would be able to sue their parents and all kinds of ridiculous things like that, which actually is very strong for parents. So, but I think it's mainly right-wing opposition that prevented us from ratifying any treaty. That it's just the Senate that has to ratify. But even when the Senate was in Democratic hands, it still was not ratified. So I'm not sure exactly which treaty you... Right, okay.
I have one question for you, Nancy. We've been registering some young voters, and so, just so I'm correct, right now we register a 17-year-old and we say if your birthday's in July, right now you can't vote in the primary, but that might change very soon. Right, that's what I'm saying. So your birthday is in July, you're definitely voting in the general election, but at this point in time they cannot vote in the primary, but that may change very soon? Okay, so we're going to need to let everybody that's registering, because everybody is registering high school kids right now, and that's a beautiful thing, but I want to give them the right information, because if they can vote in the primary at 17 3/4, let them vote in the primary. Our next speaker is going to be from the Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, Jamie Bedrin.
Hi, everyone. Moms Demand Action is I'm Jamie Bedrin, and Moms Demand Action is a grassroots movement of Americans demanding common sense solutions to gun violence prevention. And when we talk about gun violence prevention, we're not just talking about mass shootings, we're also talking about domestic violence, we're talking about suicide, we're talking about gang violence, we're talking about violence in our inner cities, violence that happens here in Montclair. We were founded in the days right after the Newtown shooting, the shooting at the Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut. We now have something like 4.5 million members, and members in all 50 states. What's important to note is that we also have several gun owners in our organization. We're not an anti-gun organization, and our goal is to really put into place common sense legislation. Our organization works with survivors of gun violence. We work with mayors. We work with law enforcement, faith leaders, the medical community. Right now, we're starting to see a lot more people in the medical community speak out about this violence, and it's so important. And Cory Booker, our senator, has actually talked about it a lot because he sees the financial impact in Newark especially. But, when there was the shooting the other day at, was it YouTube, I think? One of the doctors or surgeons at the hospital made a point about, it was as if he was like fed up, and well, we all are. Every day, 96 Americans die from gun violence. So our numbers put us at about 33,000 a year. But one of the things that's so sad about that is that about 2/3 of those deaths are to suicide. And it's really a shocking number. And even though it makes me sad, I think it's really wonderful that more people are sharing their stories and talking about this, because the way to prevent it and to, reduce it is to talk about it. And I think we will see change. So Moms Demand Action sort of operates, so by the way, I said we're a grassroots organization, and we are, but you may have also heard of Everytown for gun safety, and Everytown is, I like to call it, the more corporate side of Moms Demand Action. They partner together also with Mayors Against Illegal Guns. Mayor Michael Bloomberg, he had put together Everytown using a lot of money, but Moms is really grassroots driven, and it's really kind of unbelievable. We had a meeting before Parkland where we had 25, 26 people, which is considered a really healthy meeting. And then Parkland happened, and now I just sent an email to like 800 people in New Jersey, in Essex County. We have chapters in every county in New Jersey. It's really outstanding. Okay, so the four sort of tenets of Moms Demand Action. Close the deadly loopholes in our background check system. Promote gun safety. Sorry, I feel like I'm going in and out here. Support reasonable limits on guns in public places and reduce gun trafficking. We are extremely fortunate in New Jersey, extremely fortunate with our laws, and they're only getting better. The Assembly just passed 6 really good laws. I'll tell you about those in a sec. But we're at the mercy of the states around us, and trafficking is a huge issue. Just a couple of recent changes in New Jersey. Many states, including ours, passing the ERPA, which is Extreme Risk Protection Order. Governor Murphy hasn't, I don't think he's signed these yet, but we're like maybe one step ahead of that, or one step, like that'll be the next step, because you know how it goes through the Senate and the Assembly, and then he has to sign the bills. But so the Extreme Risk Protection Order will enable a family member, police officer, someone who has a close relationship with somebody who may be at risk for hurting themselves or somebody else, to take away their weapon. It's temporary, but the idea is to get the weapon out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. It's common sense. We want there to be fewer guns in the hands of people who shouldn't have them. Some people just shouldn't have guns. Many people are calling these the red flag laws. We try to stick to ERPO because some people find the term red flag a little insensitive, because it's insinuating that there may be something, should you suffer from anxiety or depression, there's a red flag, and it's silly. We get that there are many, many people in this country who have mental health issues, and many of them will never do anything violent or harm or be at risk for harming themselves. But we also passed background checks on private gun sales, and this is huge because there's always been this loophole. Certain guns required background checks, and certain gun sales did, and others didn't. And so, Moms Demand Action and most people in this who have been studying the impact of gun violence will tell you the number one thing that we can do to reduce gun violence in this country is to increase our background checks and make them stronger and more comprehensive, really is the right word. And we also New Jersey just is reducing the maximum capacity of ammunition to 10 rounds. It used to be that the magazines could hold 15 rounds, and now we've brought it down to 10. Without getting into a whole discussion about that, that is sort of rooted in this concept of what's an assault weapon, what should we be banning, what shouldn't we be banning, and what we know is that, it's not just the actual frame of the weapon, it's how much you can, load into it in terms of ammunition. So, 2 more things to tell you. We also run a really wonderful program called Be Smart for Kids, and this program is entirely about keeping kids safe and adults safe from unintentional death by firearms. In this country, something like nearly 2 million kids live in homes with unsecure weapons, whether that's a weapon that's loaded, a weapon that's loaded and in a safe that's not properly locked, kept in a shoebox in a closet. The point is, it's just too easy for kids, teenagers, to get a hold of a loaded weapon. And this program, I have felt this from day one, and I stand behind this, so this is going to be one of the major pillars of Moms Demand Action. It teaches parents how to talk to other parents about the presence of a loaded weapon in the home. So my son is having a play date at Jed's house. I don't know Jed's parents that well. It could be awkward to ask, hey, by the way, what's your gun situation at home? But as it turns out, it becomes easier and easier. One reason it becomes easier is because there's nothing wrong with doing this over email or texting somebody, but really it becomes easier because we're so used to asking people about things like, does your kid have any allergies? Because like let's take advantage of the obvious. So many people are so now used to saying like things like that we're trying to, take it from the background and bring it to the foreground. Doesn't need to be judgmental. It's simply about, finding out. And then finding out what to do if they say no, that's one thing. But if they say, yeah, we do have a gun, the next step's there. But, a lot of my friends have told me, again, the first few times it's, I would say get a little sweaty. And then you just sort of start asking. And I hope that it really reduces and eliminates the whole question of stigma because, too many lives are being lost as a result of that. And there's no need for judgment or stigma. It can get tricky, and we can help people navigate that. That website, if you're interested, is called besmartforkids.org. And that is about it. I tried to give you the really condensed, version. So what we are starting, so the NRA has done this where they've rated legislators, giving them an A through an F, like a sanitation rating, I don't know if you guys have ever noticed this in restaurants, but we are starting something called the Gun Sense Seal of Distinction, and we just started that right now to. But the interesting thing is that candidates will apply for it, and then we will review their documentation and their their positions and stuff. So that's fairly new. But our website, the Everytown website, has so much information ranging from if you just wanted to look up gun laws in New Jersey and compare them to gun laws in Florida or Wisconsin or Wyoming, you can do that. But you can also look up how much the NRA has contributed to different lawmakers. It's amazing, yeah.
The article in the paper recently about the 19-year-old kid that walked into the high school and luckily, I'm saying, only shot at somebody in the ankle.
This was just what happened yesterday in Florida?
Yes, yeah. In Florida. So the problem is between national and state laws.
Yeah.
Because this guy ordered it online without a background check.
Yeah.
He could have lived in New Jersey and couldn't do a thing about it. So this is a national organization. I think they ought to start highlighting that because it was just delivered to his door, and he could have been in New Jersey.
So, to be honest, I need to read a little bit more about the background there, what happened. But you raise an excellent point. It's so frustrating that we can't pass better federal legislation. You're absolutely right. It's just a no-brainer. We must do this. What a lot of people have said, not from the beginning, but in the last couple of years, is that what may happen is that we'll see so much change on the state level that then the country will flip, sort of along the lines of gay marriage. But I don't want it to take any longer. Of course. I don't know, but these what? Right. Yeah. I'll tell you, I guess this isn't really personal privilege, but I teach at Montclair State. I read a lot. I teach media, journalism ethics, which is a crazy time to be teaching media ethics right now. And then also to be involved with Moms Demand Action, teaching media ethics and have a massive school shooting that sparks a national, event, movement. But, there was just something, so Columbine's 20 years now, right? But the Columbine survivors, some of them are starting to speak out too. And this is why I really feel like we will see change, because the presence of the voice and the survivors that are witness, they see Newtown was so devastating, and I got involved right after Newtown, but they were babies, and so the Parkland kids have said we witnessed this, and we're aware of Newtown, and nothing happened, which is actually, things did happen. There are many states where we have come at, Moms Demand Action has brought in volunteers and we've challenged NRA legislation. So even though sometimes it doesn't seem like much has happened, I could give you examples from Oregon and Colorado where the NRA has literally like tried to put, laws on the books, and we've said you've got to be crazy. Kidding. And we've had to like fight back, and we've succeeded. I don't mean to take it in another direction, but I see your hand. One sec. But just getting back to that. So what was I saying? So but the voice, right? These kids who they witness Newtown, they can register, and they're done, and their parents are done, and we're done. And now, though, that the Columbine survivors are speaking out, it's even like more gut-wrenching. Oh, just reading about it. So yes, sir.
And the backing, which is a rough thing. You have all these stations now which have all the program that says that, you're going to take my gun away from me. Why do I need an AR-15? I was a Vietnam veteran. You don't need an AR-15. I don't care who you are. Bambi ain't that bad. I don't care what the deer is. But the whole thing is you're talking about a weapon that you could shoot through walls. You can't get behind a desk with an AR-15. I use one of those things. It'll go through a wall. It'll go through your desk. It'll go through everything else you're talking about. And if you have that weapon in your house or whatever thing, how are you going to be trained to really use it? It's like a machine gun. But the problem is people here to have in their head like the West, and you go out shooting and you stand and shoot each other. It doesn't work that way. And people's guns get taken away from them all the time. Cops get their gun taken away from them. You can name it. Everybody get their gun taken away from them. It's not an easy answer because most people think it's an easy answer. It's going to solve something else. Is you got to give somebody else a gun.
The 350 million gun, like President Obama said, there are 350 million guns in circulation. How are we going to really come get them all, right?
Yeah.
But I will say that I think one of the best things we can do is, it goes back to the League of Women Voters, getting people to vote. It goes back to really strong local journalism, because when I read really good stories, you got to go? Sorry. Okay. Well, I'll share this with the rest of you. Let me see how I can say this. I've learned a lot. I've been doing this for 5 years, and I really have learned a lot. And if I were a single woman living on my own in Maryland or Wisconsin or Wyoming, and I, lived 25 miles from the local police station, and I was a single mom, maybe I would want a gun. Maybe I would want a handgun. That doesn't make me a terrible person. But there's a real difference between an intelligent person who has one gun that only has a limited capacity to what he's talking about, right? It doesn't mean I'm pro or anti. That, I think, is really where the problem is. It's, most people, 90% of Americans, believe in stronger background checks. We have got to, get all of those people to vote for better legislation, because it's such a shame that we're all suffering, in that regard. I say that because I think most people are sensible, and I wish that we could, even being in the media, I hate when it's presented as, pro-anti. Yeah. Sure.
A little bit of a digression, but you talked about asking other moms that your kids might be playing with. Have you ever had a yes answer?
I haven't, but I have had some funny answers like, well, we have an antique Civil War rifle. I'm like, okay, I think that's okay. She's like, we don't have any ammunition. But I have had friends who have had yeses. And I had one recently, my friend, and what my friend took the conversation to many levels. And I think she said to the other mother, I'm a little uncomfortable. The mother said, I keep it in a safe. It's locked up. And my friend said something like, could I see your safe? And this mother said, I'm not comfortable with that, but I get it. So let's move the play date to a park. They kept the conversation very even-keeled. It wasn't, as I said, about judgment. We ask people about the safe because, unfortunately, it's really not enough just to have a lock and key, because it's very easy for kids to open up something like that. We really recommend a biometric safe, which is a fingerprint. but I was proud of my friend because she, you know, she was honest, the mother was honest, and they just moved on. The other way to do that is to turn it around and either invite the child to your home, or another option is, I realize your kids are older, but if you want to have a play date and you're not sure of the situation, you offer the info first. So, hey Maria, you know, the kids said they want to have a play date. It just so happens this Thursday's a great day. Do you think, you know, Perry would like to come over and play with Owen for a little bit? Let me just tell you, we don't have any dogs, and we don't have any trampolines, but we do have a cat. Is she allergic? Oh, and by the way, just so you know, we don't have any weapons of any sort in the house. It's sort of like, it's not about playing games, but by offering the info first, you plant the seed a little bit.
One question.
Sure.
There's a law, I heard of a law, a federal law they wanted to do where the people in gun states could bring their gun to the non-gun state.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up, and I'll keep it really brief because I know we have to move on, but we desperately, desperately do not want CCR, which is concealed carry reciprocity, to pass. It would be terrible for this country. Yeah, and the basic gist of it is that, you know, right, exactly. I mean, yeah. I mean, New Jersey is what's called, just so you know, a May issue state. It's very difficult to, first of all, get a gun permit, and then to even have one that you would carry with you. But CCR, really, read up on it. I mean, nobody wants it to pass. Police don't want it to pass. And last thing is, feel free to, well, some, but but there's been a dip. Let's see, everytown.org, momsdemandaction.org, and, you know, if you have more questions, I guess I can give you an email address, or momsdemandessexnj@gmail. You can catch me. You're welcome. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jamie. We met Jamie's folks up at the Essex County High School in North Caldwell. I can never get the name right, but it's in North Caldwell. I assure you of that. West Essex, that's it. We met there when they did the first walkout. And now my timekeeper is giving me the signal. Our next speaker, Cynthia Rogers is our next speaker, and she's going to talk about Families for Democracy.
So I think this is a topic that's very important to all of us, regardless of the size of our families, the age of our families, the composition. We've all thought about how we can promote democracy. And maybe as a way of transition from what Jamie said, I was really struck by this cover of Time magazine and some of the student leaders at Parkland and what they have been doing. I have found it utterly so inspiring. And so one question I had before I read the article was, well, what is the curriculum like at this high school? I mean, that it produces students like this. You know, what are the courses they teach? What are the activities? What is the social studies program? And as a former high school government teacher, I'm always intrigued by what the social studies program is like. And which takes me to my first point, which is the home-school partnership in terms of promoting democracy in our families. So I read the article, and you know, it gave me a lot about what they're doing, how they're organizing, a little bit about an AP government class. But what bowled me over was the byline. The article was written by Charlotte Alter from Montclair. And Charlotte and my son are good friends. And where did they meet but their 5th grade social studies class, which Mr. Elder, who unfortunately is no longer with us, but taught by Mr. Elder. And this was a wonderful, wonderful social studies program. At the dinner table, we would hear about what they were talking about, the questions he was asking. And it really does, I think, underscore the point that as parents, as grandparents, we need to look at what our social studies classes are teaching. Are teachers talking about the Constitution, the protections of the Bill of Rights, the political system, and how it works. My personal experience going back when I was in my 20s, the very first year that I taught, I was a 12th grade government teacher in Charlottesville, Virginia. And at that time, Virginia required a year of government. And the first year you teach is just one of the hardest. It's just a very hard year. And maybe 2 or 3 months into that first year of teaching, I had a call from a woman who wanted to come and talk with me about the learning differences that her son had. And it was very legitimate. And we had a great conversation about how her son wrote, how he read, how he processed information. And at the end of that conversation, she said, well, Ms. Smith, I want you to know that I really like your assignments. You have very creative ideas for assignments. And I happen to be the president of the League of Women Voters of Charlottesville, and I'd like for you to come to our next meeting. And that's how I got hooked on the League. And that was many years ago. But that program, that social studies program, is I think can be very key to how our children and grandchildren begin to think about government and becoming involved in democracy. My second point is to involve your kids in your own political activism. Back in the mid-90s, we were involved in a slate that was running for local office here in Montclair, and we gave a party in our home for one of the candidates for mayor. And our children, our daughter was about 10 at the time, our son, 3 or 4 years younger. And just because of the way we operate, they got very involved in giving the party. And they invited the parents we invited the parents of some of their friends. And I could tell that it really made a difference to them that we were doing this. And later my daughter's, in her early 30s now, and she said, Mom, I think that gave me the idea that people really do make a difference in elections. And this particular slate also, in their newspaper advertising, they had pictures of families that supported them. And I thought that was an interesting idea, that democracy, indeed, it can be, a family process. Marches, how many of you have been to a march in the past few years? I mean, it's like say what you will about our current political climate, it's certainly promoted a lot of activism and a lot of marches. We took our kids to the Million Mom March in Washington in 2000. It was on Mother's Day. We canceled our Mother's Day reservations for dinner, and we all went to Montclair State and boarded the bus and went to Washington. And we'll never forget it. It was a wonderful day, and certainly our children continue to march. Our son and I boarded a bus to go to the Save Darfur rally in 2006. There were a lot of groups, a lot of religious organizations that were organizing for that. And like I say, now it changes you. We were in Brunswick, Georgia for the recent rally, march, what was it called on the gun? Yes, March for Our Lives, excuse me. And it was very meaningful to be there just as a spectator, and I just really can't emphasize that enough in terms of involving children and involving families. I think to take our kids to the polls with us to vote is very important. We always did that. Our kids would go with us. It helped that Applegate Farm, is right across the street from where we vote. So if there's any resistance, there could always be, we'll get a, ice cream cone on the way back, So anyway, so the kids always went, they watched us. And usually when that sample ballot, is mailed, the mail is there, and that's a good opportunity, I think, for kids to see, the opportunities as well. I guess my fourth point has to do with conversations that we can have at home with children and grandchildren. My husband and I both have backgrounds in education, and we really do think that you have to spend a lot of time listening to those conversations. And I know we often would talk about things that our children thought might be unfair. And, you know, we would talk about, well, why do you think that's unfair? And look at something from the perspective of the other. Think about leadership. What makes a good leader? And then when it gets to politics, you know, maybe don't take the easy answer, oh, it's all a joke, it's all hopeless, because it's not, you know. And it's really, elections are very close, and our vote matters. And I guess another thing, we don't read newspapers online as much as we read them at home, and we've always had, you know, the New York Times and the Star Ledger and the local papers, and we take both of them. And we've just always had those newspapers right there by the dinner table. So if we've read something that we think might interest the kids, to point that out, and, you know, and vice versa. And I'm sure each of you have many, many more stories and examples, but I do think that this is really the future, is how we, you know, how we pass on the importance of voting and democracy to our children and our grandchildren. Thank you.
And now we have the Montclair State Office of Civic and Voter Engagement, Britta O'Dondi and Amir Botros. Welcome. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for having our office involved in... Sorry. Thank you. I wanted to say thank you so much for having our office involved in today's program. My name is Britta O'Dondi. I'm the graduate coordinator at the Office for Civic and Voter Engagement at Montclair State University. We're housed in the Center for Student Involvement. So our office works alongside with Weekends at Montclair, the Leadership Department, as well as the Greek office. Our office, the central focus is to inform the student body about local elections and the issues at hand, as well as providing them resources in registering to vote and finding the different mechanisms of voting that are available to them. Let me go over some things. One thing that's unique from Montclair is our demographics. We are centered on a campus that is involved in 3 towns. So we have Montclair, we have Little Falls, and we have Clifton. And what's unique with that is a few years ago, through our Office of the President, we were able to get polling locations directly on campus. So we have one on Machuga, and then we have the other polling station right by campus on an elementary school. So students just have to walk down the street and vote. And in order to do that, we see students wanting to be more involved and wanting to vote more in elections, so our office is focused directly with that. One thing we have is we are partnered with NSLAV, and so they provide information and data, particularly on how campuses vote. NSLAV is run by Tufts University. So for instance, in 2012, we had student enrollment at 17,859, and as of 2016, they were able to track that it went up about 2% to 20,000. And then what they also track is the number of students who register to vote, the number of students who actually vote, and then they divide it up by age group, by your major. So if you're like a nursing major, they can see what percentage of nursing students voted, what percentage of humanities students voted, and so on. And so that's one very helpful resource for us and our office in planning different programs throughout the semester. Now the programs during the semester. I started working in the office July of last year, so during the summer. I'm a Montclair State student as well. So what we started off by informing ourselves in the voting mechanisms. First, it was holding a training with the county clerk's office for Montclair for voter registration forms. Because students, one of the hardest things they face, and what they always say is, well, the problem they face is they feel as though they're not informed enough in the voting process. So we recognize that in order for them to become informed, we ourselves as leaders and people in the office, we need to be informed. So we held a training where we learned about the proper ways of approaching students, the proper ways of filling out the voter registration form, especially with our campus address, the proper ways of filling them. Like one common thing is most students don't understand what a municipality is, so they just skip it. And as a result, when they go to vote, they encounter problems because the polling worker might ask, where did you register to vote, which municipality? And they get frustrated with the process, they give up, and they never return to the polling station. So that's one common problem we kept on seeing with our voter registration forms, and we addressed it. And one way we addressed it is in having the voter registration forms ready, we would have the student address without the number of the door or the dorm number. We would have just the town, the zip code, and so all they would have to fill in is their door. So it'll make the process a lot easier for them. Another thing we did is this year we had the midterm elections, so we had a push for voter registration and getting students ready for that. We've learned one thing, and that is that college students like incentives. If you can provide and extra credit, absolutely. If you can provide something free, they will come, and they will come easily. So one thing we had was different events involving food and voter registration. So pizza and politics, red velvet and registration, democracy and donuts. So we got the food and they came and they registered to vote as well. We also had something called Constitution Week. College campuses around the United States are required to inform their student body about the importance of the Constitution and provide them with resources for them to, if they want to, learn more about the Constitution. Now, we recognize that this year we are in a political climate where if you mention the word Constitution, someone might be very apprehensive to approach the topic at hand, so we renamed it We the People Week to make it more inclusive to everyone. So what we did was we offered free pocket-sized constitutions, and on the back it was from the ACLU, so it provided, like, if you were stopped by the police, what are the proper rights you have and things of that nature. We also had a voting booth come in on our campus, so students would have a first-hand, experience if they've never gotten to vote. Because students go into the voting booth and they think they just select one thing and that's it. So in having it directly on campus, they could see, no, you might have to, choose maybe the superintendent or the local clerk or things of that nature. So we had that as well. And we also had a workshop called Voterwhelmed, informing the students about, if they're overwhelmed, how to go through the process, what are the different mechanisms involved, and so on. And then this year, with the gubernatorial race, we had a unique experience with having the Lieutenant Governor debate held directly on campus. So we had Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver now, and then candidate Carlos Rendo come on campus. Students were able to, go through a lottery system to get their tickets. And we saw a lot of participation and involvement that way with different organizations, from the Black Student Union, from LASSO, the Latin Organization for the Students, and we saw the need to create programs and create incentives to get students involved, because that's the thing. Students want to be involved, but they don't see the mechanisms for them to get involved. So we were trying to provide more of that for the campus community. Another thing is challenges. We encounter challenges because, one, students don't feel as though they're educated enough to vote, and then they don't feel as though they have the proper mechanisms. So throughout the year, we're trying to create more programs that can combat those challenges for the future. And then in terms of our outlook for the future, we are still holding different events on campus. For instance, this week we have on Thursday something called World Fair Day. And so World Fair Day focuses on different cultures across the world, from food, entertainment, information. So we wanted to be a part of that process. We got involved in the planning committee. And for instance, my main role this week is to create our table is going to be the global vote. So informing students on the different voting mechanisms found around the world. One can be a write-in ballot. So students will write in on a piece of paper what are the hurdles that they face when voting. A second component will be something fun and interactive. In Gambia, a country in Africa, some people vote by placing a marble in a tin container, so they can do that for a voting choice. And the third one will be electronic. We will urge students to go on our Instagram page and answer a simple question, as well as having a different component of having students, if they want to register to vote, because the primary is coming up in June, and then we have the elections coming up in November as well. Another effort we're pushing right now is making Montclair a voter-friendly campus. Montclair works with TurboVote in order to get students to fill in the voter registration form online, but we see with recent legislation that's going to be in effect hopefully in November, students will be registered to vote already once they have their driver's license. So in becoming a voter-friendly campus, we are pushing the effort to not only allow students to have different mechanisms to find out about the important issues, but to have also funding for programs specifically for those issues. And the last thing is just making a long-lasting impact, not only on our campus community, but the local community as well. So thank you so much for having us involved in this program today.
In speaking to the freshman orientation meetings, of which there were many, and we talked about the importance of voting, and we tried to pick the issues that might hit them personally, like student loans and so on. And your office, not you, but before that, went to tremendous efforts to get the students to vote. They gave them T-shirts, and they had things on their dorm doors to remind them to vote.
Correct.
But the result was terrible. It did not bring the students out to vote on the election day. You're doing a lot more now, and I can only suggest that the best way is personal contact.
Yes.
And I wonder if you can't do something within each dorm to have people actually talk to the residents of the dorm to make sure on that day that they actually vote. It was very disappointing to see, with all the effort that was put into it, the actual result was poor. So I commend you for adding many more things, and I wish that much success.
Thank you so much. To touch on your concern specifically, that's actually one of the major problems we saw, in that we would have programs, but what was needed was that face-to-face interaction. Students tend to act on something they know their friends might be, interested in, or someone they look up to might be interested in. So to address that, one thing we're doing this year, particularly this upcoming school year, is getting involved early on. Through student orientation, we're going to have a voter registration, voter awareness type of activity in place. And then to specifically address what you were saying, if we could get RAs in each student housing unit involved, we're going to do that. We partnered up with, we're in talks basically, partnering up with the head of the RAs in order to get not only the RAs trained and informed of the proper process, but how can they talk to the students in a way that they don't feel as though they have to decide between party lines or decide between particular issues, to at least have an open dialogue with a familiar face. Because we as an office understand that we cannot reach everyone. We cannot urge everyone to go out to the polling stations. We cannot create events where everyone is going to come. But in creating a coalition through RAs, through the different student organizations, through the different departments, through the different student-led organizations, that is the way we can leave a long-lasting impact. So thank you so much for your concern. Yes.
You mentioned the new rule about when you register for a driver's license being able to vote. I would urge you to tell the students to double check well before the election and make sure they are actually registered, because there are so many problems with the bureaucracy normally, and this is a new program.
And even to address that, if the voter registration deadline is in October, and the law will take place in November, so we are going to continue in educating the students, because that will never stop. There will always be new laws in place, and students, the main thing is they're just not aware. It's not that they don't care, it's just they're not aware of the information at hand. So we will continue doing that. Thank you. And next I'm gonna have Amir talk. In our office we have the Andrew Goodman Foundation. So he's been in the Andrew Goodman Foundation for the past 3 years. He's going to talk a little bit about that. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here. Well, first of all, I just want to say that when I was a freshman, I took a public speaking course, and I got an A- in the course, so don't expect too much from me today. My name is Amir Boutros. I'm a senior at Montclair State University. I'm graduating in May, and I will be attending law school in the fall. Also, I have been the Andrew Goodman Foundation Student Ambassador at Montclair State University for the past 3 years. So I think a good starting point would be to say, what is the Andrew Goodman Foundation? Well, for starters, it wouldn't take a Sherlock Holmes to know that it's named after Andrew Goodman. Andrew Goodman was a college student who lived in New York. He, like many others, has seen the inherent injustices of segregation and racism that were rampant in the 1960s. So in the summer of 1964, which is also known as the Freedom Summer, Andrew went to Mississippi to register African American people to vote. The Ku Klux Klan, with assistance from the local law enforcement, murdered Andrew Goodman with 2 other African American men, James Chaney and Michael Schwerner. This event stirred up controversy, since Andrew Goodman was a white college student who lived in New York and was murdered in the South by the Ku Klux Klan. People finally saw that hatred and violence are not restricted by color. Violence and hatred extend beyond the borders of race and ethnicity and color. This event was a part of a chain reaction that ultimately led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act, a piece of legislation that was not only about voting, but also overarching social justice principles. The Andrew Goodman Foundation is built on the legacy of the heroes of the civil rights era, and the legacy of Andrew Goodman himself. College students, like Andrew at the time, register other college students to vote without any form of bias. The Andrew Goodman Foundation is a nonpartisan organization, and our efforts transcend party lines. So now I think it would be a good time to talk about what exactly that we do. And I think that I cannot talk about that because Britta covered everything that we basically do. But everything that Britta has spoken about, we share in that. I go to these things most of the time when I can, and when I cannot, we send out the other ambassador that we have on campus. But I think it would be beneficial to talk a little bit about the bigger picture of what's happening. So when I assumed this role 3 years ago, I realized that we have 2 kinds of goals. We have a short-term goal and a long-term goal. The short-term goal is to register students to vote and to facilitate the voting process for them. And this is intertwined with the long-term goal. We achieve this short-term goal by exactly what Britta said. We register them to vote, we make tables, we hold information sessions. When somebody says, how do I register? We give them a form to fill out, and they fill it out. We review it for them, and we mail it for them. We make sure that they sign it, we make sure they know what a municipality is, and that's what we do. Now, the long-term goal is a harder one, and it is to plant civic engagement within the student's DNA. We do that through discussions and through meetings where we talk about controversial issues and meaningful topics. It is very unfortunate that in our society we need big and dramatic things to talk about things that matter to us. We are stirred by Nazis marching in Virginia. We say, oops, we need to talk about that. When we see a school shooting and we see parents mourning the loss of their children, we say, we need to talk. When we see discrimination in a local Starbucks, we say, we need to talk. But we often ignore that the solidarity of society and that the stability of nations are not achievable through passionate every once in a while talks and conversations. They are achievable, however, through regular, steady, not so passionate conversations and day-to-day interactions. What we do is we need to plant a seed in the students so that this can lead to future change, because not everything is happening today. You cannot change people's mind by a 1 hour or 2 hour conversation. Public discourse is not to be decided by public officials only, but rather by ordinary citizens like you and me. Thank you for all your efforts, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, folks from Montclair State. And we have one more very important speaker, Susan Mack, a member of the League, and she's going to talk about dialoguing with others.
But this is something that means a lot to me. So how many of you have had a conversation with someone in the last year not from your same political perspective? Okay. And those conversations, did they go well? How many of them went well? Were they productive? So a lot fewer hands out there. So I'm glad you guys are talking, but they're not going well. So that's why I wanted to talk about this. I think the reason why it's such a hot button issue for me is we can't move forward unless we're talking to each other. And it's just so critical. And it's interesting because I talking about dialoguing with others, with friends, and they're like, oh, that's so important, that's so important. And it truly is, not just to me. So personally, for whatever reason, I have so many friends who are not from my political spectrum. I don't know why. My friends who are from my political spectrum say, why is that? I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea, but I have a lot of them, and a lot of very good friends who are from the other side of the aisle. Surprisingly, we've had some really good conversations over the last few years. And nearly all of them have said to me, Susan, you're the only one I can have this conversation with. And it made me think, I kept on hearing this, like, what is it about the conversations they're having with me that make it different than their other ones that aren't going well? Apparently, there's a lot of them that aren't going well. So I thought about it, and I think it's three things. It's listening, it's sharing my experience, and a respectful, open mind. And the listening part is the key one, and it's the hardest one, I have to tell you. So lots of times I'll call up a friend, hey, how you doing? And something will be on the news, and then I just get this blast from them, like this emotional blast. I'm sure you guys have all had it, of energy. Can you believe blah, 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 blah. And I just listen. I try and understand why they believe what they believe, or, why are they so strongly about it. And I'm really just fully present with them and really wanting to understand why they're thinking that way, without any judgment, without any agenda, without wanting to change their mind. And I found is I let them kind of spew out what they're talking about, their emotional context goes down a little bit, and it gives me then the opportunity to be heard about my experience and my thoughts. So then I'll share that stuff. And again, I don't do it with an agenda. I don't say like, you're wrong, I'm right, and all that. It's just purely just sharing information. And for me, that's really about understanding and fully believing that we are all this part of this collective humanity. These are friends of mine. I have a lot in common with these folks. And we're all humans. We're all here together. We all want the best for our families, for ourselves, for our country. And we just might have different perspectives. So that helps me keep going and without judgment. The without judgment part is key, to keep the open mind and to be respectful. And it's hard sometimes. The things I've heard, boggle, I'm sure you guys have heard it too. So that brings me to the facts, which is a big thing right now. And just a personal example is I was visiting my aunt in January, and we were having this conversation about immigration, and it was a group of people, and a statistic was cited that was to me outrageous. I'd never heard it before. I thought it was crazy. I didn't think it was true. So everybody, continued talking while I pulled out my phone and started Googling, like, is this statistic right? Like, if it's right, I may change my view on immigration. Like, knowing, like, I know it's not right. But, I'm trying to keep an open mind. And I'm Googling, not finding a thing. I found something like somewhat kind of what they were talking about. It was from a website that I'd never heard of before. So we can only imagine, right? And I spoke to my aunt the next day, and who's a very smart woman, Phi Beta Kappa, smart woman. And I said, about my experience. And I said, if we can't even agree on the facts, how are we going to move forward? And I said, if that's really true, I said to her, I couldn't have a different view on immigration. And she agreed. I said, if we're not talking to each other and we can't get to the facts, how are we going to move forward? And then kind of a same situation but different was I was a few weeks ago having a tea with a friend of mine in Montclair, again, a different perspective, and we started talking about the Me Too movement. And she shared that she didn't really agree with what the press was doing, and why were they beating up this comedian? He was just hanging out with some fans of his. And I said, well, my understanding is they weren't just fans, they were actually up-and-coming comedians. And then she said, oh, I didn't get that. So then she kind of understood, so clearing up, the facts. And then she said, well, and as media person, I have firsthand knowledge that everybody at the show has this lock on the door. I'm sure you guys know who I'm talking about. I have the lock on the door, this infamous lock. And I'm like, yeah, right, Again, does she have good information? So I believed her. There was no reason for me not to believe her. And I said, oh, yeah, that, I feel misled by my news source, because every article I read about it didn't have this, everybody has a lock, it's not a big creepy thing. So I went home and I found through various sources confirmation that, yes, guess what? Every executive at that show has this infamous lock. And it was a no. So I was misled by my news source. And it's just, unless we're talking, we can't even filter out what's really happening in our country. It's so, so important. And it's hard, it's difficult, it's uncomfortable. But when we believe in our collective humanity, I think it's possible. And I think that we can have more positive conversations. So I hope I said something that was useful. And oh, hey, Doris. It was real. Yeah, I can. So it was related to Matt Lauer, that he had this lock where women in theory were coming into his office, and he could lock the door from his desk, so they couldn't get out. My understanding is the executives do have it also to keep people not coming into conversations, to lock the door from their desk for privacy and privileged information. My daughter was my angle to the validation. So, yeah. But it's all over, and unfortunate it is, because everybody wants to sell a newspaper, everybody wants to sell a TV show today, unfortunately. So it's all very sensational. So any other questions? Thank you. Yes.
I have a question for someone from I was on the
TV, because they're recording the TV.
Oh.
We can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me.
Now we can.
Okay. I was on the march in Newark, not the anti-NRA march. I was there for the lives of the children that lost their lives. And I saw people out there getting kids to register all over the place. I was there for around 3 hours for the march, and where we all met. And I don't know who it was, but they must have registered hundreds of kids, because it was going on all the time. Wow. And then somebody got up. I don't know if it was Cory Booker. I don't know if it was our new governor, or it was some other speaker, but they announced that 82% in the last presidential election, 82% of 18-year-olds did not vote. Eligible to vote, that they knew they were 18 years old based on the census, and it didn't say whether they were registered or not. They didn't vote. And as I'm watching these kids sign up, right now they're impassioned. So not picking one party or the other, we got to find a way to get these young people to the polls. They will make the difference in the next 2, 3, 4 years, because now freshmen and sophomores, they're living what's happened with these kids that are out there fighting this one particular issue right now. So we got to get them to the polls.
Right. We were actually, the league was at the Students Demand Action event in Brookdale Park last night, and we could not find a 17-year-old that was not registered to vote, which was the good news. There was actually, we did find one 18-year-old, and there was two. The students had a voter registration table, and the league had a voter registration table. But that is key. As the voter registration chair, it is my commitment to get to all the high schools in Essex County and either somehow partner with this One Voice, One Vote program that Nancy had spoken about to make sure all the juniors and seniors that are eligible can do it. And I'd like to work with MSU also to talk about other college campuses. Essex County would be great. Unfortunately, when we go to places in Montclair, as the prior voter registration person who's here, Cynthia, everybody's already registered, you know, which is, so we need to go to different places.
Email addresses when they sign the registration form, they put out an email address as an option.
Oh, do they? I don't think so. Yes.
That would be phenomenal, because then you
Yeah.
can email all of them and say, go to the poll. You're not telling them how to vote.
Yeah.
It's like a robocall. Email all of them.
Nancy?
That's great. We have postcards but I think the email is better for students because they're more, they use their computers more than they use their mail.
Right.
So you can get that information from them, you can ask them for their email, and then you can do a blast.
Could the institutions do the blast? Could, like, Montclair State, do they do blast to the election? Right. But it's the face-to-face, I guess that, yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So we do have a couple of candidate nights that were on the back of your, in case you guys didn't go to the fourth page, coming up for the 10th and the 11th. And I also want to give a major shout out to Margot in the back for the Watchung Booksellers. It's a great opportunity to buy books for kids, for grandkids, for friends. She brought a wonderful array of books about democracy and involving kids. So, yes.
Well, I'd like to thank all our speakers and everybody that came today.
We hope that you receive something beneficial that you can take home with you, whether it's about the league, democracy, or guns and violence.
I think one of the really important points is we all need to be involved. We need to know, I mean, there's no sense of going to the polls and you're going to flip a coin. It takes time and commitment to learn about the issues and how the issues resonate with you. So that's one of the big things with the league is voter education of putting the issues out there, because what we're going to get in the news, I don't want to use the words, I'm going to use the words, fake news, facts matter. When there is an issue, there are very few issues that don't have somebody that stands to lose money or gain money by the issue. I think the NRA is a giant one that you have a lot of money from the gun companies that, they don't sell guns, they don't make money. If it's an aircraft manufacturer, if you have more safety regulations, what's it going to cost Southwest Airlines to inspect all those airplanes? It's all about money on one level, and you have, unfortunately, America, unlike all the other Western democracies, allows corporate money in the election process, which is another league issue that we're against, but this really skews everything, because people can go out there, whether it's the big gulp soda, people beat up poor Mayor Bloomberg about, it's too much soda. You get the beverage people get out there like, oh no, you're stepping on our rights. So to be informed is really important, and that's
So
something
for
that
all
the
of
league
you
does.
that are interested, so the league is more than just voter registration. That's the big takeaways about voter education, voter registration, voter everything. And if we entice any of you to join the league, that would be great. Men, college students, young, old, everybody in
Young
between.
people.
That would be great. So there is an insert in all of your programs. If you want to fill it out, you can give it to any one of us, and that would be great. Again, thank you all for coming and spending your time here.
Thank you.
What?